Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first Velero open discussion slash community meeting of December 2019. We are closing in on the last Velero meeting of the decade soon, which is very, very cool. So as you might have noticed, we had a little break between the open discussions here and the last one because of KubeCon, of course. KubeCon happened. The entire team was there. We had a blast. So we're going to talk a little about what we did at KubeCon today. But also, we want to make sure that we fill you in on everything that's going on with the project, of course. I see a lot of community members here today. Super, super happy to have you all here. If you have any questions, please just unmute yourself and speak up. If you can't do that or are uncomfortable doing that, you can always ask questions or add comments in the chat. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to hand it off to Steve. Let's see.
Yeah, sure. I can hop in. I don't really have much in the way of status updates. KubeCon followed by the Thanksgiving holiday here in the US. So I've been sort of away from the computer for a while, and I know Nolan has some discussion topics on KubeCon, so I won't go into that too much. I guess the one thing is I wanted to say a big welcome to our newest team member, Ashish, who's on the call today. I think this is day 2 for him at VMware, so welcome. And I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit and just say hi to everyone.
Sure. Thank you. Hey everyone, my name is Ashish. I have been like a community contributor for some of the projects in Kubernetes, and I'm super excited to do this full time. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Welcome, Ashish.
Thank you.
All right, so moving on, Nolan.
By the way, Jonas, you stopped sharing the screen. I don't know if that was on purpose or not.
Trying to fix that too.
First, I'm going to apologize real quick. I did see some chat last week asking about the community meeting last week. So I think there was a little communications mistake that a bunch of us just took the week off for the Thanksgiving, myself included. But I also thought more of us were going to be here. So sorry to anyone who showed up for the community meeting expecting it to be happening and it wasn't. But also just an update from KubeCon. Great meeting everyone that I was able to. There was a lot of talk about DR. We had Dylan Murray, who's not on the call right now from Red Hat, give an overview of Velero and Ceph, along with Annette. Sorry, I forget her last name, both from Red Hat. There's a lot of discussion about CSI, and Adnan and I were at the SIG Storage face-to-face. The number one question I was hearing was discussion about volume snapshot and volume backups moving on-prem scenarios. So moving your backups from one data center or one site to another. Which is, I think, a scenario that we're still, not just Velero, but just Kubernetes solutions in general are still working on. There's some ideas in SIG storage, but volume snapshots is kind of the building block that we're working on and then moving forward. So a piece of that is the disaster recovery working group that's spinning up with SIG apps. I know there was discussion of that yesterday in the SIG-Apps meeting that I wasn't able to attend. But one of the disaster recovery engineers here at VMware, Dave Smith-Uchida, is working on that, and Jing Yang from SIG Storage. And also, I think I mentioned this before, but the CSI volume snapshots, the CRDs and the code has moved to beta. The common controller that is in that all CSI drivers kind of rely on, that interfaces with Kubernetes, that's getting split up into a couple different controllers. It's pretty much the same code, but they're kind of pulling it apart. That's mostly done, but the release will actually happen after Kubernetes 1.17 is out. The plan is to get that out by the end of the year. And my plan is to help get that out. Thanks. My plan is to help get the tests updated over December. And then I put a link to the discussion. This was during the SIG storage deep dive at KubeCon. Jing and I forget the other gentleman's name. They talked about the differences in the CRDs. The big thing was they went from basically updating the spec in the CRDs to adding a status field that tells you what changed and gives you a better idea of what bindings changed. So we'll be looking at integrating that into our CSI support. And we're also going to talk a little bit more later about where Velero goes with our CSI support, and kind of Steve and I have been bouncing some ideas back and forth about what that implementation looks like. And I think that's mostly it. I had some discussions about contributions. I don't know if anyone on the call is from Maya Data. I had some discussions with people there. But I know some Maya Data folks are working on Velero, and I'm hoping to get some of those changes upstreamed if we can. That's pretty much it for me.
Hi Nolan, this is Kiran from My Data, and I have like a few other team members on the call with me.
Yeah.
Great to be here. This is my first time attending a community call.
Okay, great. Yeah, I had actually sent off an email this morning to Marat, I think. I was trying to find some engineers at KubeCon, but unfortunately I missed you guys at the booth, and at both booths, unfortunately.
Yeah, I wasn't at the KubeCon this time, but yeah, a bunch of other guys were there. I will get in touch with you or the email to just get added to this invite as well. Maybe like Jonas or you.
Sure. Yeah, I think you should just be able to join the Velero mailing list, and it should automatically send you an invite. And these should be pretty much every week. December will be strange because of US holidays coming up in 3 weeks or so, but after that it should be on a fairly regular cadence.
I can send you the instructions again, Kieran. I saw your email and I'm going to reply to it.
Thanks, Jonas.
Good thing.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to hearing more about discussing more on the disaster recovery and the migration use cases using Velero. That's where we are trying to see how to fit into OpenEBS, for example, at my data. Some of the challenges that we have are around volume groups or like consistency group implementation with Velero. I see some parallel backup work has progressed along. Yeah, anything to contribute towards those aspects, or help code contributions or design, that'll be great. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. And this is Steve just jumping in. I would say, if there are specific topics that you want to cover, feel free to add something to the discussion topics section, and you can do that going forward. We're happy to talk about any of those topics, and we should have some time today if you want to jump into some of that.
Cool. Yeah, I'll probably briefly share like what I'm grappling with. Is now a good time, or should I just wait for?
Maybe we should go through the rest of the status updates, and then we can jump into it.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Kieran. So we'll continue the discussion in a bit. Carlicia, status update from you.
So giving a status dates back to KubeCon, there was an interview I participated in with another VMware person, Tom, our old product person, and someone from Dell. And there is a write-up and podcast and a video. It was about what Velero does and how Dell's Power Protect is using Velero via one of their plugins. And okay, let me see here. I need to make one last tweak to the Helm PR, so that should be ready to go pretty soon. And going through GitHub PRs and issues. And I have a question whether we should think about canceling the meetings for December 24th and 31st.
Yeah, I think that's a given. I don't think anyone on the team is going to be available during those days. So yes, I'll make sure that those are canceled on the one invite that everyone will have in their inbox shortly.
And maybe we can send a tweet to just saying it.
Yeah, definitely. All right, any questions? So Carlisa, you did an interview here with the new stack. How did it go? How was it?
It was a full-on meeting interview. I don't know how it was stressful. I had never done an interview like that before. I basically walk in the room, and then it also was live, which I didn't know until I was there. But I think we covered a lot of ground about Velero use cases, and I thought it was really good. And it was good because we had three different people, myself as a developer, Tom as a product person, and that would be Tom Spoonamore, if I pronounced it correctly. Natelshay, I'm really sorry if I mispronounced it. And he is from Dell. So we had all of these different perspectives. And there's a cute photo.
That's really cool. Yeah, so I saw, I did a little scroll back on the new stack Twitter feed, and I saw that their live feed has been viewed over 1,200 times already. So yeah, you're internet famous now.
Gosh.
Again. Another thing that you have been alluding to leading up to KubeCon is this secret project of yours. Do you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Oh yeah, I totally forgot. Yeah, I actually got very burned out between the conference and doing the launch of that project that week. But it was really cool. So the secret project is the Podlets, which is a podcast. And that week I launched it with 5 episodes. So there was a lot of content being sent out. But the cadence of the show is 1 episode a week, and the episodes are going to drop on a Monday. So you can start your day listening to people talk about cloud native. And yes, so Jonas is putting up on the screen the hosts of the podcast. We rotate, so usually we're gonna have at least 3 of us, and we might be interviewing people who are not the host, or not really interviewing, but talking to. The last episode that we put out was with Joe Beta, and that was a really cool conversation because we tried to ask him questions that weren't being asked in interviews that he has done out there. In the next recording, we are going to have it with Craig, and I cannot pronounce his name. Somebody help me.
You're talking about Craig McCluskey?
McCluskey.
Yep.
Yes. Craig is awesome. If anybody has, so amazing. So I'm really excited to be talking to him. And if anyone has questions for Craig, there is also HackMD that people can add questions to. Anyway, that is the secret. That was the secret project. Secret no more. I'll grab the link for the HackMD.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on the launch. Well,
thank you. I appreciate the support.
All right. Moving on. Adnan, do you have any status updates?
Hey, yeah, not much in the way of status updates. I can talk a little bit more about KubeCon. So I think Nolan didn't really mention that after our talk, we had a few questions about Velero and how that ties into some of the CSI volume snapshot stuff that we were talking about. So that was interesting. And then I was also at the Helm booth a little bit and got into some interesting conversations about Velero there as well, where people were kind of talking about how they can back up Helm apps. And I pointed out that there was like a plugin related to that, but not completely up to date, but that's something that we may want to look back into. Other than that, there was this, Nolan sort of briefly mentioned the data protection working group that's starting to be spun off. That's going to be a cross-SIG collaboration between SIG apps and SIG storage. So Xing and Dave Smith-Ishida from VMware, who are kind of leading this, had discussed this at SIG apps yesterday morning, and then the next step is to start a mailing list, take it to SIG storage on Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So if you're interested in kind of learning more about that group and getting involved there, I would suggest going along to the SIG storage meeting on Thursday. That's a good place to go and get involved there. I think that's all I have. Other than that, I'm kind of catching up on email, Slack, and GitHub. Carlisi, I'll try to circle back to that Helm PR for the Velero 1.2 update so we can get that merged.
Yeah, thanks. Steve made a comment, so I'm going to update it after this meeting. So if you could take a look, I can add any other updates that's necessary.
Perfect, will do. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, awesome. Adnan, can you just add in a link over to the discussions that are being had in SIG storage, or just to SIG storage here?
Yeah, let me see if I can, find a link to that.
Yeah, cool. All right. So at KubeCon, we had a bunch of amazing community members actually join us for a community lunch at KubeCon, which was super fun. So we had a bunch of people join us on two tables here. You can see we had a nice little Velero flag as well that I believe Nolan now has in his office. So most of you attended here. Do you have any discussions that were had during this this community lunch that you would like to talk about?
I can jump in for our table. We talked for a while with Carl from Cruise Automation and with Dylan from Red Hat about kind of the multi-tenancy issue or feature that some folks are interested. So the idea is that rather than having Velero backups and restores essentially be scoped to like a cluster admin role, kind of enabling namespace owners to be able to back up and restore their own namespaces. There may be some other levels of granularity for the permissions there, but namespace is certainly the first one. So Carl from Cruise is definitely interested in this for his team, and Dylan talked a little bit about it and interest that they might have in it as well. It's something we've had kind of in our backlog for a long time, and something we'd like to do, but there are definitely some technical challenges that are not, I would say, not dissimilar from the Helm problem, and kind of the issues around Tiller running as a cluster admin inside the cluster. So we're hoping to continue discussions there and do some work on trying to come up with a technical design that might enable that kind of multi-tenancy solution. So I'm looking forward to continuing to discuss that and work on that in the new year with community members.
Yeah, one interesting topic that came up at our table was actually someone I passed in the hall from. He was, I forget his name, but he was formerly a consultant and now he's at Pluralsight. And he was asking about the difference between doing etcd control dumps and Velero backups, and asking kind of why we were doing things through the Kubernetes API server versus directly against etcd. And the big thing is doing things in managed services. So if you're trying to back up through a managed service such as EKS or AKS or GKE, you don't get access to etcd. You just can't use that tool. And also, if you do have access to that, it's a big hammer. So you don't get any granularity whatsoever with restoring or backing up. You just get the whole etcd. So Velero gives you control over what you can and can't restore. And then we were also kind of discussing what the roadmap was and what people might want to see. Pluralsight kind of had a mix of on-prem and cloud. So they were also interested in kind of on-prem options for movement of snapshots. That was kind of another theme that I heard was Velero came from a cloud-centric world where a snapshot is something you take and then Amazon and Google and Microsoft all like replicate it to their object storage for you. And people working in a more traditional world, a snapshot is like a point in time pointer to some blocks. And it's a temporary thing that you leave around to do. Maybe you try something or you mount it to take a backup and then you get rid of it. And the backup is something that you copy to another site, to a tape, something like that. So it was interesting to me to hear those two worlds, hear those differences.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in there. And I definitely yesterday at the SIG apps meeting where where Dave was talking about the data protection working group, that was an issue that he and I guess he primarily brought up in terms of kind of the limitations of the existing CSI snapshot API, and that there is no facility for doing that kind of data move. So I think that's an example of an issue that they want to discuss and try and tackle in that working group. And I think from the Velero perspective, if that's something that we can get done upstream through CSI, then that means that's not necessarily functionality we need to build into Velero, but rather upstream functionality that we can integrate with.
Yeah, and I think I've heard that from folks like at EBS and Dell EMC and and basically anybody that has an on-prem solution. They're kind of like, well, what can I do with this? And I heard from some folks that were like, I work in a classified environment, like I can't connect to the internet. Like that's just not an option. So Kubernetes itself is just facing this more and more now that it's kind of grown. It's facing now, how do we move it into this space? And so we're starting to tackle these kinds of issues and translate it back from this bringing this cloud native approach to kind of more traditional data centers.
So Nolan, the problem that you mentioned is something that we addressed with the Velero plugin for OpenEBS. We have a similar situation where, though we run in cloud providers, OpenEBS takes a point in time snapshots. And then for restore, unlike cloud providers, we don't have those volumes on the other side. So we hooked in via the Velero plugin to transfer the data after taking the point in time snapshot to an S3, something similar to Restic plugin that you already have. And then on the restore side, we reconstruct that volume from the backups that we have taken. Yeah, it will be. Yeah, I was not aware of the data protection working group. That would be something interesting to see how they come up with the standardized API around that.
Yeah, that just started this week from conversations at KubeCon. So that's why we mention it. I didn't realize it was going to continue on Thursday, but definitely that's at 9. Yeah, this same time as this community meeting. It sounds like that will continue.
Cool.
Awesome. I had one really interesting discussion during these meetings as well with a gentleman from Library of Congress. They are looking to move into running Kubernetes. They still have a few development clusters and so on. But they one of the things that they said was that they're actually using Velero as one of the to showcase that Kubernetes can be safely deployed and backed up and recovered and restored. Because that is, of course, very, very important for Library of Congress to be able to restore data in case something happens. So yeah, it was a really fun discussion. They're still in very early days there, but yeah, it was fun to hear that they're using Velero as one of the main pillars of showcasing how Kubernetes can be used. All right, I think we are ready to move into the discussion topics. Do you want to start off with Kieran's topic here?
Sure, that's fine.
All right, Kieran.
Great. So some of the things that I wanted to bring up were already being discussed as use cases. I think the consistency group or the volume group is definitely one, and some may fall under the data protection discussions as we go forward. So I'll just present one use case and just want to hear what people think here, or like, has it been already thought before, right? So with Velero right now, we have this capability of taking a backup at a namespace level by applying the labels and that kind of stuff, right? So one challenge that we have is typically an application actually comprises of more than one stateful workload. For example, it could be like a Elasticsearch with some other database that has like some information that ties into the information that's provided in the Elasticsearch, right? So when we take a backup, we tend to snapshot one volume at a time. So it kind of becomes inconsistent if we want to restore it on the other side. So is there a way for us to define at a higher level, like, this is an application snapshot? I know today at Velero we deal with PV snapshots, but can we think about an application level snapshot that kind of encompasses more than one volume and even more than one application? Have there been some discussions around that in the past in the community?
So Steve, isn't this something that the Dell Power Protect team is doing? I mean, their application, their higher level application has application backups.
Yeah, I'm not positive off the top of my head if they're dealing with sort of consistency groups, or if it's more of an inconsistent backup at the namespace level. But this, I mean, the idea of consistency groups for volume snapshots, at least, is definitely something that's been brought up before within the Velero community. I know Portworx, if you look at the issue that I linked there, was interested in this. And I believe it's also something that's been discussed upstream related to CSI. So I would say there is definitely interest in it, though nobody has really put a significant amount of effort into kind of figuring out how it would work yet.
Seth had mentioned having something like these volume groups, so that at the storage provider level, you would say these things are one logical thing. We looked, I think this was beginning of 2018, and we looked, and the Rook team was saying, hey, Ceph offers this, but like we couldn't find that it was an actual implemented thing. It was like more like a roadmap feature. So I don't know that that's actually manifested. I also linked, this is something we've talked about in the past that Google has proposed. This is even, I think, higher level that Google has proposed. I think this is based off the application CRD, a way to define a definition for backing up an entire application. So this goes beyond just the storage, but like this would say this is everything in the application. So it would, I think, if I'm remembering the details, it would say this is the storage, these are the manifests, this is how it would get redeployed, all of that. It's kind of stagnated because some of the things that it relies on are like the execution hook KEP, which I think Adnan's going to work on in December. And then beyond that, I think some more people outside of Google need to engage on it. And then there's something related. I don't know if it's directly related, but I'll have to go find the KEP. There's a KEP for applications like Elasticsearch and Cassandra and things like that, that someone at VMware was proposing to SIG storage. That was kind of, it kind of pokes holes in the Kubernetes storage abstractions, but I don't know if that's, I don't know how relevant that is to this. It was more about managing storage topology.
Cool. I think that the one that you mentioned about the Google and Rook sounds interesting. So also like any issues that are there in the Velero community itself, I'll probably reach out to one of you to get some pointers on it to take that forward. I see that the notes are already being updated with those issues, so that's great. The storage ones are a little bit more interesting though. For example, like one of the questions that I get asked that I want to bring here is, let's take the example of elastic operator, right? When you are working when you deploy that in a distributed mode, it could actually have like multiple volumes that it writes to, which all have to be, and these are like different PVs altogether running on different nodes, right? And they all have to be in some way orchestrated to create a consistent backup. Sorry about my dog. Sorry, I'll just mute for a second.
No worries at all. Yes.
It's really excited when the dogs, somebody else taking the dogs out, he wants to go out and bugs me. Cool. Just put him out. All right. So the Elastic thing was, this is an application that came up with their own backup operator to help with migrating the data or like even maintaining a disaster copy. Can Velero make use of those operators to orchestrate, just like the way we have today plugins for storage providers? Can we have something at an application level that says, okay, if, this is an application that you need to back up, don't worry about the PV backups, but you actually make use of some other commands. It kind of ties into a little bit of that hooks concept, but this is more at a Velero level invoking application-specific backup operations.
Yeah, that's a great example. I'm not intimately familiar with the details of kind of how the Elastic operator does backups, but I'd definitely be interested to kind of look into either the hooks or the plug-in functionality that Velero offers, and see if there is a way to kind of fit it into that framework. I mean, if you were to write a custom backup item action, you could essentially have it execute arbitrary logic, and so it could potentially make calls out to the operator, signal the operator to trigger a backup. But my guess is that even if you could make it work right now, there probably are some rough edges around it, and so it might be an area where we would want to make some enhancements. But definitely have to explore some more and kind of understand it a little bit better.
Awesome. So I'll try to propose or come up with like an initial draft. We can nail down what enhancements needs to be done, or if we want to take it forward, definitely a good exercise to have. The third one and the last one that I've been asked is point-to-point migration using Velero. There's this cool solution that I see. So today we need like some kind of an S3 store that has to be there. Instead of that, in the destination cluster, what if you have like an MinIO based S3 cluster that gets deployed? So you set up the backups to go and store the data into that S3 and then restore from there into that new cluster, so that you kind of get to do the point-to-point migration instead of having a dependency on some cloud, right? Especially for an on-premise kind of solution where they don't have access to the internet. Is that a use case that could be created into a solution document within the Velero to be presented? That's one aspect to it. And the other one is like going forward, or like, is there any roadmap item in terms of supporting direct point-to-point migrations?
Yeah, so I think the approach you talked about where you have a MinIO in the target cluster that you're essentially sending backups directly to, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work. I mean, it's, as long as the source cluster can access that cluster, so there's some kind of ingress or load balancer, that should work. Certainly you always need to think about if you have your backup stored in the cluster that you're backing up, then it may not be the most resilient approach, but I think for a migration solution that makes sense. And we've tried or talked to users who have done sort of similar things to that, so I don't see any reason why it wouldn't work.
Cool.
And then as far as the point-to-point migrations, are you talking about essentially like lifting and shifting a workload from cluster A to cluster B and just kind of doing that in a very direct way through Velero?
Yep.
Got it. Yeah, I don't know that we have any issues specifically around this in the backlog. We certainly have some more general issues around kind of sharing backups between clusters, but I think, yeah, this would definitely be an interesting area to explore some more.
Can I ask for a clarification there? When you're asking for this direct point-to-point, are you asking for doing the point-to-point without, say, doing the MinIO in the target cluster? So you're asking, can I send everything directly over?
That's right.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I clarified, because I think, as Steve said, I think using MinIO is totally possible. It would be a matter of documentation to say, hey, here's how you might set that up. But in terms of straight across, that would be more engineering work. So I just wanted to clarify what the question was.
Right. I think, yeah, the solution via the MinIO is pretty straightforward. just thinking of cases where like maybe there may be some constraints on the storage on the destination side for just maintaining extra backups and all that. So this is mostly like an use case for, yeah, you have like multiple clusters. You just want to move an application around. Um, you know that, and this is for a scenario where you know that the application has to move to the new cluster. You don't really, it's not for a disaster recovery kind of a solution.
Right. This would be like let's say I'm treating my clusters as cattle, so I don't want to upgrade Kubernetes in place. I just want to install 118 and move my application to 118 versus upgrading my cluster in place.
That's right. Yeah, and I heard the new stack video. I think that also Carlisa brought up similar use case where Kubernetes upgrades could be like a good potential candidate to use this as well. So you don't want to touch the existing cluster, but you bring up a new Kubernetes cluster with a newer version and start migrating one application at a time to the other side. Right.
I believe, I can't remember the details. I'm a little bit fuzzy there, but I believe that there was maybe a KEP that was proposed upstream around application migration. I don't recall if it dealt with cross cluster migrations. It may have been kind of namespace to namespace migrations. And I'll dig around and see if I can find a link to it, or I don't know if you've seen that before.
Are you talking about the John Griffiths one?
I'm not sure. Maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I have 1162. I think that's. I'll post that here. That
okay.
I've been looking at that namespace thing, right? Data source and namespace migration.
Got it. Okay.
Cool. Yeah, that's all I had for today. I think I'm looking forward to get more feedback and see how to take these things forward. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kieran. Steve, do you want to dive into the 1.3 planning?
Yeah, definitely. Wanted to just call out a couple of things here. So, so we shipped 1.2. Probably most of you know that, but we shipped it at the beginning of December. And yeah, the link is here in the meeting notes. So
November.
Beginning of, yeah, good point. A month ago. I'm off by a month. Yeah. So yeah, anyway, we're basically starting to work on planning what we want to do for 1.3, and we definitely know that CSI snapshot integration is going to be a headline feature for 1.3, given that the upstream APIs are moving to beta with the next release of Kubernetes. But we also want to fit some additional items in there. So we're continuing to work on doing the planning and the scoping here over the next couple of weeks. I think, given that we have essentially 3 work weeks before everyone sort of takes off for end of year holidays, we'll spend a decent part of that time just working on planning and starting to work on the items we can. But so beyond CSI snapshot integration, I put a link here to our Zen Hub board, which is kind of how we go about doing planning. And there are some items that have been moved into the release backlog pipeline there. So if you're interested to see kind of what we're currently thinking as far as 1.3 scope, you can go in there and look at the release backlog. And these items are all tagged with the 1.3 milestone. The top few that are in here now are all related to CSI snapshot integration. And then we have a handful of other bugs and small enhancements that we'd like to tackle. So yeah, definitely, if you're looking for visibility, that's the place to go. And we'll continue to keep folks up to date as we make any adjustments to the scope here. And then I know since Nolan has been taking point on the CSI snapshot integration, I don't know if he had any further comments or discussion on that topic.
Yeah, so I think the big thing is So you and I talked a little bit in like the last month, like before KubeCon and a little bit yesterday about and at KubeCon about maybe taking the prototype that we have of the CSI plugin and moving it into the volume snapshotter interface. And you have a prototype of that. I know, I don't know if he's on right now. Anthony had tried doing it in a volume snapshotter plugin, and it doesn't quite fit in our model. And like you had seen that you had some issues with the restore side, just because of how Velero expects to restore a volume. We're kind of trying to do the work that the CSI controller would do before it would get there. So it might like be a weird no-op thing. So I think the big question I have right now is, will the CSI Velero plugin move from the item actions to the snapshotter interface, or will it stay on the item actions? That's the kind of the thing I want to decide before moving into beta, and also updating for the beta CRDs. I'm the biggest thing I think, aside from putting aside the interface kind of oddities, is also the fact that looking longer term, if we conform to the CSI interface, I think that's going to be longer lived in terms of like years than the Velero snapshotter interface. So I'm not sure how tightly we want to tie to that volume snapshotter interface. So that's kind of where my thinking is right now. I think I want to review your prototype of the volume snapshotter interface a little bit more closely, and then kind of go from there. I know you've also have a prototype on the Restic volume snapshotter plugin. From a maintenance standpoint for us, it would be great to have everything go in one code path. But I'm not 100% sure if that's the answer right now. So that's kind of where my thought process is right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, my overarching goal is to try and have similar or identical user experiences and also code paths for all of these different ways of backing up volumes, right? So we started with the volume snapshotter plugins. Restic operates in a very different way than those do, and has a different user experience and different code paths. And with the introduction of CSI integration, that's potentially yet another user experience and code path. And so my goal is to just try and kind of keep those things as simple as they can be, both for the user and for developers who are maintaining the code. And so exploring whether CSI could fit into a volume snapshotter was just me trying to wrap my head around whether that's even a possible approach to keep things simpler. Yeah, given the issues that I saw around how restores would work, I'm honestly not sure that makes sense as an approach. And I think your point around kind of the longevity of each of these things is a good one. I think we're kind of saying, and the community is saying, CSI is the strategic direction that Kubernetes storage is going. And so over the long run, once the major providers move to CSI, and that's the standard way for getting storage access for any of your providers, there's not much of a reason for Velero to keep around its own plugins. At least for block storage. So, and if that's the case, then volume snapshot plugins are going away for Velero in the long run, then yeah, that's kind of yet another reason not to try and integrate with that. So yeah, anyway, that's kind of where I am on it. I definitely want to put a little bit more thought into it, but I guess where I'm leaning now is that it probably doesn't make sense to try and shoehorn the CSI stuff into the volume snapshotter plugins. But I do think as we start to execute on adding the code, we're going to have to just really make an effort to keep both the user experience across these things and the code paths kind of as consolidated as possible, so we don't end up with just kind of 3 alternate UXs and code paths for each of these things.
Yeah.
We can talk about the restic bit separately. I mean, a lot of the same issues apply, although the path that we want to take with it may be different. But yeah, anyway, those are kind of my thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, and I think also any actual code that ends up happening with the CSI stuff for 1.3 needs to be behind a feature flag. I think based on what I was hearing at KubeCon was that now that it's in beta, it's basically turned on by default based on the rules for how Kubernetes stuff works. You still have to go install things to get the controllers present. But based on that, lots more people are going to have access to it once they go through the work of installing the CSI snapshot controllers and the plugins. But for Velero users, I'm still going to put all this behind a feature flag just so we can iterate on that and make sure people know we're still kind of deciding how we approach this. But I want to take it beyond a proof of concept as well. Like the version that's out there right now, wouldn't recommend for production, but I want to start moving to the point where we're not just saying, oh, hey, can this work? I want to say, like, let's start thinking about like UX and like my goal. I think I've expressed this to most of the people on the team, but I would like to see the CSI plugins get included in Velero by default. Maybe not immediately, maybe whenever we consider it ready for GA, the CSI plugins would be built into Velero and it would be delivered, and then anything else would be opt-in. Don't know when that'll happen, not saying it will, but that's where I would like to see it go eventually. But that's future. For the immediate time being, I think we need to explore, make sure we integrate correctly, and also make sure CSI is where we need it to be. So like I said, I'm going to help work on getting the tests ready. It sounds like their test suite's currently broken because of their code split. And also they're getting ready to release the images for the new controllers. And also I just want to make sure, since we talked about like the Velero volume snapshotter plugins, like eventually going away, like I want to make sure I soothe any fears. Like, we're not going to turn those off tomorrow, right? Like, this is not to say, hey, this is going away in the next 6 months or whatever. It's long term. Like, we want to be good citizens in the community and not be making our own weird thing for storage vendors. They're going to be writing CSI plugins, and we don't want them to be writing a CSI plugin with volume snapshotting and a Velero plugin that's doing volume snapshotting for too long, right? Like, we're not going to be great community partners if that's the case. You're going to be cursing our name if that happens for too long. So that's kind of the logic. But we also get today in 2019 and in early 2020, we're not going to be in a place where that's really realistic.
I haven't looked at the CSI spec, but does it have a different API for snapshot and backup as 2 steps, or is it just?
So right now it doesn't have the separate backup one. The volume snapshot API is there's a few different components to the CSI spec. There's like a gRPC API that all the drivers and everything will talk to, and then there's the Kubernetes API that Velero will use. It doesn't talk to the gRPC API. The gRPC API, as I understand it, that's all pretty much GA for the snapshotting. The backup for like data copying and things like that is a roadmap item. That's something that they want to work on. But it's not currently scheduled, and it's not currently, there's not currently code for it.
Right. I think like we were discussing earlier, there will be two sets of plugin or like the storage providers that will be using. One is the cloud providers where snapshot and backup mean the same thing, but there will be like,
Yeah, this was so Adnan and I actually talked about how the current CSI implementation works. Sorry, not the current, the previous, the alpha one, although the beta one's very similar. How the Kubernetes CSI implementation works right now. And it was very much designed by cloud providers. And internally at VMware, we had this design discussion too. The CSI spec is going to need to grow to have that data movement API and the gRPC API. And that's going to require more on-prem providers to come to the SIG storage meetings and say, hey, these are our use cases. Can we agree on like this common denominator API to move data? And again, those are every other Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. In 2 days.
And I'll call out the new data protection working group that's in the process of being formed. Like this is a perfect example of what they're trying to go after. So I would definitely encourage anyone who has a vested interest in seeing this to get involved with that, and they'll be presenting the idea for that working group at SIG Storage on Thursday this week.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so perfect.
And one more quick plug. I added, I'll put it in the chat and I'll put it in the notes. There's a GitHub topic for Velero plugins. If you are making a Velero plugin and you add this topic to your GitHub repo, then it'll show up in that GitHub search automatically. GitHub will go index it for you. And that is also now linked in our plugin docs. So just wanted to call that out. If anybody's catching this recording, I forgot to put it in my status update.
That's an awesome new feature. That's really cool.
Yeah, Octant uses it to get their list of plugins too.
Fantastic. All right, we're at the top of the hour. Do we have any last questions or comments before we end the call? Okay. So thank you everyone for joining the call today. Lots of really good conversations. Thank you all for all the feedback and interesting discussions here today. This recording will be up on YouTube most likely later today or early tomorrow morning. With that, hope to see you all next week and have a wonderful week, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.